What we have here is 6 examples of possible surveys that might be conducted. And what we want to do is critique them, see whether they're actually doing things that will give meaningful results, or results that you can actually make some judgment based on. So let's read the directions. It says, comment on the way the following samples have been chosen. For the unsatisfactory cases, suggest a way to improve the sample choice. All right. So A, you want to find whether wealthier people have more nutritious diets by interviewing people coming out of a 5-star restaurant. So this is skewed on 2 directions. One, if you're only interviewing people out of a 5-star restaurant, you're going to have a disproportionate number of wealthy people, and even the non-wealthy people who are eating at the 5-star restaurant, they feel like they have enough money to eat there, so they're probably not that not wealthy. They're probably pretty close to the threshold of wealthy. The other skew is that you're interviewing people at a restaurant. So you're disproportionately probably going to get people who eat out as opposed to people who cook for themselves. And depending on whether this is a really healthy restaurant, maybe it's some type of organic, vegan, who knows what restaurant where you're going to get a disproportionate number of healthy people, or maybe it's a really unhealthy restaurant. Maybe it's they put a lot of butter and sugar in the food. Who knows what it's all about? But this seems skewed on 2 dimensions. The best way to do it is survey some proportion of wealthy people in an environment where it isn't being skewed by the type of food they eat. So once again, you wouldn't want to survey people at the organic grocery, because once again, you'd be skewing for people who maybe eat a little healthier. You'd want to do it, maybe at some type of wealthy type of event, or something that's not food oriented. I'd have to think more about what that might be. And you'd also want to survey people who are not wealthy. So at some other type of event where most of the population doesn't fall under the wealthy category, or probably the best thing would be sampling people at an event that doesn't discriminate on wealth, and just surveying people and just ask them in a broad bucket, do you make more than X, whatever your definition of wealthy is, or is your wealth, or is your income less than X? And then ask people, what do they eat on a daily basis? Something like that might work. So in general, I'm not a fan. Not a fan. I don't think this passes muster. It's biased on really 2 dimensions. B, you want to find out if there is a pedestrian crossing needed at a certain intersection by interviewing people walking by that intersection. So this is better than the first survey, but it still seems a little biased. And it depends how you define needed. Is needed if the people walking around that pedestrian crossing think it's needed? Then this is OK. But if you want to objectively find out whether people in your community think it's needed, you want to have a broader sample. So you might want to also include drivers, because obviously the pedestrian crossing is going to affect them. You want to interview taxpayers in general. And obviously, a lot of people might be all of the above. And you also might be missing pedestrians who would be walking by that intersection if there was a pedestrian crossing, but they're avoiding it. And so those are the people who would want it the most, but they're not even going to be there because they don't think that it's worth walking around there because you can't cross the street. So you're missing a whole sample of people. The best way I would do this is I would look within maybe a 3-block radius, or maybe a 6-block radius, at all of the homes and offices, and I would randomly survey a sample of those people. And I think that would be a better indication of whether the pedestrian crossing is needed. And actually, even a better way would be to do it without a survey. You'd actually want to look at patterns of people walking and all of that, and compare it to other things that might be needed. But this one definitely doesn't work for me. Now, C, you want to find out if women talk more than men by interviewing an equal number of men and women. That seems reasonable. I guess if your survey, if you do it in a non-biased environment, if you don't do it at like a business school or a law school where people might talk disproportionately, or it might be skewed towards women or men more. I don't know which way it would be skewed. But as long as you do it in a neutral place, and I guess their survey is maybe they'll ask some arbitrary question and they'll just time. They'll count how many words the women talk versus the number of words the men talk. That seems like a reasonable way to see if women talk more than men. And once again, as long as you're not talking to some skewed sample or biased sample, this seems pretty good. And it's good as an equal number. There's an equal number of men and women in the world. This seems to be, no, I'll give it a smiley face. I'll give it a smiley face right here. D. D. You want to find whether students in your school get too much homework by interviewing a stratified sample of students from each grade level. Well, the first thing I want to do is just, what is a stratified sample? And all that means is you're going to sample people in the same proportion that they exist in the population. So let's say that your population, your school had, say it had 100 ninth graders. It has 200 10th graders, 300 11th graders, and 400 12th graders. Actually, the school I attended actually had, it went in the reverse order. I think we had 800 ninth graders and 400 12th graders, and so many people dropped out. But anyway, we don't have to be realistic here. So you had a total school population of about 1,000 students. So if you want to do a stratified sample, let's say you wanted to have a sample size of, let's say, 50 students. So you wanted to sample 50 students, and you wanted it to be a stratified sample. What that means is you had 100 ninth graders out of 1,000 in your school. So 10% of your school's population is ninth graders. So in your stratified sample, 10% also need to be ninth graders. So 10% of 10% of 50 is 5. So you'd survey 5 ninth graders. 5 ninth graders. In both situations, this is 10%. This is 10% of, you could view it, this is 10% of the population. It's going to be 10% of your sample. Likewise, you had 20% were 10th graders in the population. So 20% of your sample, or 20% times 50 is 10 10th graders. 10th graders should be surveyed. And then 30% of your school is 11th graders, so 30% of your survey, so that should be 15 11th graders. And then finally, 40% were 12th graders, so in this situation, 40% of your survey, which is 20, should be 12th graders. So that's what a stratified sample means. Now let's talk about whether this is actually a good survey. You want to find out whether students in your school get too much homework, and you're interviewing students in your school. The one thing you definitely will find out is you will find out whether students in your school think they get too much homework by interviewing a stratified sample. That would be true. That's what you would find out. Now, whether you could say that, in a broader sense they're getting too much homework, you might want to include a larger audience, especially the other stakeholders in the whole homework doing process, especially parents and teachers. And actually, a better way to do it would be probably to compare the students in your school to a very similar school that has a different amount of homework, and maybe see the results on standardized tests. And you want to control, you want to make sure that there isn't, a huge difference between the income levels or the education levels of the kids' parents and all of that. I mean, it becomes much more involved. But this one still seems a little bit narrow, and all you're going to find out is whether students think they get too much homework. And I can almost guarantee you they will think that they get too much homework. And so this survey might be a little bit of a waste of time. So I will put a frowny face. E. You want to find out whether there should be more public buses running during rush hour by interviewing people getting off the bus. So once again, what you're going to find out is whether people getting off the bus think there should be more buses. So I won't write it here, but you're not going to find out objectively whether there should be more buses. Frankly, the best way to evaluate that, I think, is to just see how full on average the buses are. I would actually pull the actual buses and see how full they are during rush hour. If they're like, if 90% of them are 100% full, or people can't get on a bus because they are full, and that's happening frequently, and their total wait time is just getting ridiculous, that's probably a better assessment than just surveying people. But even beyond that, this is skewed on several levels. One, you are surveying only the people riding the bus. You're not surveying the other people in the community who might have an opinion on this, drivers, taxpayers, who would have to pay for more buses. And then even within the bus riding population, you have to think about when they're getting off the bus. If you're getting people off the bus during rush hour, I can almost guarantee you that they're going to say, yeah, we'd like more buses because they would have less wait time and the buses would be less crowded and they wouldn't have to sit next to anybody. So even if it's not needed, they're going to say it is. But if you interview people maybe getting off the bus during lunchtime who don't use the bus during rush hour, they might say, no, we don't need more buses at rush hour. We need more at lunchtime. So you're going to get different answers depending on when the people are getting off the bus. And obviously, you're going to get very different answers from people not riding the bus. So if you want a broader audience, if you're kind of the city councilman trying to figure out what to do, I once again, like the crosswalk, I would survey a random sample of people within 3 miles of the bus route or something like that. And I think that might be a better result. F. I'll switch colors. You want to find out whether children should be allowed to listen to music while doing their homework by interviewing a stratified sample of male and female students in your school. Once again, stratified sample just means that if my school is 60% male, then 60% of my sample will be male. And that doesn't really seem relevant here. F seems very similar to the do students think they get too much homework? Just as, almost every student's going to say they get too much homework, almost every student should say they should be allowed to listen to music if they want to. And that's not going to be that's not really going to answer the question of whether children should be allowed. If you want a broader sample, you might, just like the situation with the homework, include parents, and include teachers. But really, if you wanted to answer this question, the best way would actually be to look at, to survey students who listen to music while doing their homework and students who don't listen to music while doing their homework and see their relative grade performance, and that might give you a better answer. So once again, I think this one's a little weak, and the bus one was also a little weak. So the only good one here, if it's done right, is C. The other ones, they all needed a little bit of work to actually be surveys that would give meaningful information.